All right, we're streaming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to go just one week out of, or one meeting out of order, so we take advantage of this little bit of time that we have. Last night, the internal monitoring report was shared with the board, and there's really little out of the ordinary to share. So I believe that we can get through this. I'll make sure that these are saved over to the FAC drive. They're certainly on board docs. I think we had them on board docs last week, but we'll make sure that we get those over to the FAC drive. Every quarter, then we're responsible for we have to provide a couple of different things to the board. One is, of course, the monitoring report, but the other one is actually the quarterly financials. The quarterly financials are actual versus budget, and then uh, where we think that we might end the year. So this is what is required every quarter, and Gina generally gives this presentation to the board as she did last night. First piece is monitoring the fund balance and reserves. And as we wrap up the audit for last year, then we'll be posting the audit, and it will show where the reserves ended for the prior year. And we were ahead of where we believed the reserves will be. The biggest component here is that we ensure the board that we have no less than 4% and no more than 8% of general fund revenues as unassigned reserve. And I think if you remember how I defined unassigned reserve is if Tabor and our multi-year obligations are required, if we have assignments for very specific purposes, such as insurance, and we had shared that with you. The other major component, other than insurance, is also our instructional materials. Those are the pieces, again, that we ensure are properly reserved for so that when those expenses do occur, they're certainly predictable that we've set aside those funds. Then when we look at the unassigned is defined as if it isn't one of the other ones, then it's unassigned. So it has no real definition other than to say it isn't restricted, it isn't assigned, therefore it's unassigned. And unassigned fund balance historically had a best practice somewhere around 2 months of expenditures or somewhere around 15%. The state of Colorado's fund balance is at 15% required by statute. However, our board has said no less than 4 and no more than 8, and that is based on the expected volatility or unpredictability of revenues and expenditures. And as a school district, we've generally been somewhat predictable, other than, say, the floods. We had the floods, and then, of course, we had COVID. I would say most of those were fairly unpredictable. So when we look then as a percentage of general fund revenues, we see, and I'm colorblind, so this is fantastic. So we see this maximum 8% line here, and you can see that we've generally never been close to that number. And you can see our actual unassigned fund balances for the prior 3 years plus the forecast for the current year, and that we then meet the requirements of the statute, not the statute, sorry. We meet board policy, and we meet the requirements of the monitoring report so that we are in compliance. A couple of times ago, we talked a lot about where our investment policy is and why it needs to provide liquidity in board policy And the limitation is that we would have expenditures over that 30-day period. So when we talk about fund balance reserve, we say unassigned cannot be less than 4 and it cannot be more than 8. At the same time, we want to make sure that we have cash liquidity over a 30-day period. And certainly we meet that standard. And we've been in compliance with that standard. We've already talked about the investment policy and the prudent investment standard, as well as our cash and the differences between cash and fund balance, which we've discussed. So what does that look like? When we look at our average monthly operating expenditures, you can see that we are down here. And certainly our cash position is well above, our unrestricted cash position is well above the 30-day required for operating expenditures. And why is that? Historically, this number here would decline rapidly into February. And the reason for that is we use state share through February to run operations. And then as taxpayers pay their property taxes. We then collect those in March, May, and June. And because we collect those in March, and May, and June, we're actually spending down those funds in the subsequent year, all the way down to February until we start collecting property taxes. The piece that I would say, though, is that there has been a statutory change, and the statutory change that I mentioned was we used to collect this money here over a 12-month period. So we were collecting, the state would pay us our state equalization over 12 months. Now they're paying it over 9, and that significantly adjusted our cash position, which we are very happy about. It's going to allow us to make a few adjustments to our investment strategy. It's part of the monitoring report, and the limitations obviously is that we want to monitor accounts receivable and accounts payable, and we want to make sure that we are doing so without being charged any of these penalties. Anytime that we do, or late fees, anytime that we even we generally are working with the vendor because we believe it's more of the vendor not being able to apply the payments on time, and that has certainly happened for many school districts across the country with Excel Energy. Anyone who's using Excel Energy, they've been having quite a bit of time applying bills, payments to bills. And so we've worked with them to ensure that we are not paying any penalties. Again, I would say that, of course, Chris cannot on his own, Superintendent Gadowski cannot on his own decide to borrow money. He can't do that. No bank would allow him to do that. No bond would allow him to do it. They all require a board authorization and a board resolution. And so we do report compliance. And then what we do is track bonds in our MLO. And we are tracking from the 2018, the remainder of the 2016 bond, that all of those funds have been spent, and that we track MLO expenditures in furtherance of board policy, and we do that through the budgeting process.
Aaron, I'm so
Yes,
sorry to interrupt. We have transportation, just FYI. We have them on.
set up. And
We have,
so,
yeah.
it's so certainly we have audit compliance and internal controls. Some of the internal controls we've went through at a prior FAC meeting, and then we will continue to talk as we move forward with our RFP process. in those RFP processes, not only on aligning to GFOA recommendations, but also to federal and state requirements, and we're reporting compliance there. The audit also ensures compliance. So we then would show our quarterly financials, and once we have our other two, we finish on the flip side of this, of the presentations we have now, we'll then come back and I'll just give you a quick update on the quarterly financial statements and why that's important. It's required statutorily that we provide and that the board review no less than a quarterly basis the financial condition of the district. So that is also why we provide the quarterly financials. It works really well because we provide the quarterly monitoring report at the same time that we provide the quarterly financials. So we'll come back to this once we hear from transportation and IT, I believe, on the assets, and we'll come back to our quarterly financials.
Thank
Good
you,
morning,
Igor.
How are you today?
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. We're doing well.
Great. And Igor, would you rather, do you want to present or do you want me to pull up your presentation?
If you're able to pull up our presentation, we have the notes on our side, and our fleet manager, Albert Francisco, will go through the data and then we'll answer any questions.
So Albert, the only thing I'll ask is you just tell me when to go to the next slide, and I will do my best to pay attention and get you through those pieces.
Excellent, thank you.
So that's asset protection. Can we get one more?
I believe it's only one page.
Okay. So let me make sure. Let me go first, Albert. Let me just highlight let me increase the size here of the table so we can talk first about the table and why that's important and what are the CDE requirements for vehicle inspections. So I'll turn it over to Albert and Igor and the transportation team. So Albert, will you please introduce yourself? Igor, maybe introduce yourself and the rest of your team who's on this call, please, before we get started.
Sure. I can start. Igor Petrovich. I'm the Director of Transportation, and with me I have Albert Francisco and Oz Flores, and they can go ahead and introduce themselves and their roles with the district.
Hi, I'm Albert Francisco. I am the fleet manager.
Good morning, everyone. Oz Flores. I'm the Transportation Operations Manager.
I'm going to turn it over to you, Albert.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. The report that you're looking at is for our Colorado Department of Education required state inspections. They are annually, and the requirements for them is that they are done in the month that they were done prior. So if you were to complete a CDE state inspection, let's say on August 2nd, you would have until August 31st to get that completed before it would be considered either late or just out of compliance if you didn't do something else. So the report that you're looking at here shows that we had a total of 160 inspections that were required to be done. Out of those, we had 153 that were completed on time. The one note that I want to make here that's important is that none of them were out of compliance. They were just late as due to the month that they were due in. So the various reasons are listed below, but every vehicle that was not completed within the month that it was in, it was either down, meaning it was red tagged and not driven, which keeps us in compliance with state regulations. So 3 of the inspections resulted from them just being out for repairs at vendors. And as soon as they came back from the vendor, we were able to complete those inspections. 3 of them were caused by workload and staffing. We have had a reduction in staff during this past year that we are getting close to filling. But during those times when you would have vacations and things like that, they had started the inspection, but the person that was on it was either on vacation and couldn't complete it, and they completed it when they came back. Again, the vehicle was down, it was red tagged, it was not out of compliance. And then one of the inspections was a clerical error. which was one of the newer vehicles that we purchased. I believe it was 1105 from McCandless. And what had happened was they had done the inspection when they received it, but we didn't receive it for almost 40 days after they had received it for other complications. Something wasn't installed properly on it, so they kept it. But when we received it, that was the date that we had entered as the inspection being done. And that clerical error wasn't found until we came to that 1 year inspection when they had done it prior. And it was I think it's 45 days earlier. So that was just a clerical error of why that inspection wasn't done on time.
And that's it.
That is it. That concludes it.
Great. And so, Albert, I'll bring this up and over. But what we do also want to share with the committee is, as Albert was talking, these are statutorily required, and then the board passes board regulations, and these are the board regulations that transportation is required to follow. There are two sets of regulations that come from the state. One is centers around drivers specifically, and then the other one's around the transportation and the rules around the vehicles. And we are audited on this. Albert, I'm not sure the last time CDE did a quick review of either driver files or the fleet files. When was that last time that CDE came, if you remember?
So that was during the pandemic, and they were not on site. It was either 2020 or 2021, and we are due for an audit this school year. So they will be visiting this year.
And so what I'll do for the benefit of the committee, if they're ever really want to dive into the requirements for transportation, these are in here, and you can see that we have two pieces. Over here we have the minimum requirements for vehicles, the operation of those vehicles, and of those drivers. And so all of the CD training that's required, I would argue, quite correctly, because why would I argue if I wasn't correct, that out of the entire district, the one group of individuals that are required to have continuing education, it is our bus drivers. And so we thank them so much. They are educators. They are the first educators that every kiddo sees in the morning, and they are the last educators that kiddos see at night. They're very important to everything that we do. And in order to provide that, this is Igor, Albert, Oz, and their teams to make sure that we have working vehicles, and then also that we have our drivers prepared, and we have our drivers through the number of hours that they're required to have for training and certification. Igor, can you remind me how many hours, give or take, that our drivers are required to have?
Sure. CDE requires us to have 6 hours of yearly training for our drivers, but we go well above that. We do an in-service every year before the start of the school year. And as of the calendar change, we do have 4 additional days that we've implemented as either training days or bus cleaning days. So we'll have at least 2 training days in addition to the 6 hours that we're already providing before the school year starts. And then as we see how the school year goes, we may introduce even more trainings if there are regulations or things that we need to go over.
And the last thing that I would mention here is, historically, the state of Colorado has been at the forefront of setting minimum standards for buses. And you can see up at the top, the CDE certified bus manufacturers. There's a very specific set of rules that Bluebird, etc., must follow in order to comply with state law, and actually before we can actually purchase those vehicles. And Colorado has been at the forefront of pushing those manufacturers as to what's required for safety. etc. And those buses, as Albert mentioned, then are required to be inspected on an annual basis. The last thing I would add also, Albert, is that we want to emphasize that whether a bus drives, whether it moves 1 mile or not throughout the year, we are inspecting that bus. And so just know that we do have vehicles as we rotate our vehicles through inspections. We need to have enough vehicles in place so that when we have vehicles who are in inspection, that we have other vehicles, replacement vehicles, who then can go out on routes, etc., and be prepared. So what happens is we have that rotation, as Albert mentioned, of all of our vehicles, whether they're used for athletics or activities, as well as through routes that they have sufficient number of vehicles to continue operations while the number of buses are being serviced. And I would just tell you, and this is the greatness really of transportation and of Albert and his team, is you will notice that they do 160 in a year. So just divide that by 12, and we have an inkling of the amount of work that they're doing on our fleet. And I would say on behalf of the finance team, on behalf of the FAC, I want to be able to say to Albert, Oz, and Igor that we appreciate what you do. And it is extremely important, not only because it complies with state law, but we would do it anyway for the safety of our students. So I'm going to open it up to our FAC members. If you have any questions, James, Malini, Kelly, Alexis, Venus, you're all on. If you do have questions for the transportation team, feel free to unmute so you can ask those questions.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the information. This is Kelly Bergstrom. I apologize. I'm not feeling well enough to go on camera today, but quick question. I noticed that the date listed on the state website said effective October 30th of 2024. I know you guys have done these annual inspections, having served on the FAC for a while, but are those new rules, or is the state just now? I'm just trying to understand the effective date of October 30th. Were there changes to what you have to inspect, or just is the state now looking at it closer?
They changed their rules. The state board adjusts those rules. Rules have been in place since, I don't know, the beginning of buses. So Kelly, the piece there is that these are the current rules that are effective October. And so as the rulemaking process, so this is a technical rulemaking process that goes from the state board through the Secretary of State until those rules are published on the Secretary of State's website. Then they're effective going through the notice period, etc. All of the requirements for setting those rules.
Gotcha. Super helpful. And then other question, just sheer morbid curiosity about, it looks like you're doing about 13 inspections in a month based on Aaron's back of the napkin math. How long does it take you to do an annual inspection amongst all your other numerous duties?
So I'd say the average is about a week and a half to 2 weeks. It really depends on the age of the vehicle. So obviously the older the vehicle, the longer it usually takes. Sometimes the PMs that are coming around are due because of the mileage that are there. So it increases the amount of work that's done in one period for them, such as having to do transmission work as opposed to someone that doesn't have to do it for their PM that they get it in that day. So it usually averages about a week and a half to 2 weeks.
Awesome. Super helpful. Thank you, dear.
You bet.
And Albert, and Igor, I talk way too much. So was there anything that I said that was incorrect or need further explanation?
No, absolutely not. The rule changes, as you had pointed out, are just things that they will update from time to time. There was nothing on the inspection side of the house that has changed. Most of the things are minor. One example would be that we're no longer permitted to have stickers on any of the windows, like a now hiring sticker or anything like that. But there was nothing on the maintenance end. There were some operational changes and things that we're already have implemented or are working on implementing now.
I have a question. Was the interruption of service because of unexpected breakdown?
No, so we never saw I guess a break in service. All the inspections and really to Aaron's point, we had a good ratio of spare units that we're able to tap into in the event we have to pull a vehicle out of service, whether it be for maintenance purposes or breakdown reasons.
Great. So last year we were talking about staffing issue. Is this still an issue for the past fiscal year?
Yeah, yes. So some of the mechanics that we lost were at a master level. So what that means is the years of experience and of course their technical skills that they have. And we have that ladder here in this district. So we have a Fleet 1, Fleet 2, and a master mechanic. And losing somebody that has that skill level at a master is quite difficult to replace. So when you lose someone with that much knowledge, it just takes time to get someone in here to do this. So that usually impacts the amount of inspections that you can do in a month.
We have been, excuse me, sorry. We have been able to hire. We're almost fully staffed. Albert is still looking for one more mechanic, but we've had some tremendous hires over the past year, and we're getting very close to being fully staffed.
So it doesn't have any impact on your daily operation. Okay.
No, it does not.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Igor, Albert, Oz, thank you so much for being here today and participating in this process. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we'll move on to the next piece, and that is our IT asset protection. And Greg Mortimer is on the call. And Greg, I would just ask, do you want me to have this presentation up, or would you rather present?
I think either it's fine if you keep it up there. I think it's only 3 slides, so happy to do that, Aaron. Okay.
And Greg,
So,
if you can introduce yourself to the members of the committee, and we can get started.
yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Aaron. So, hello, my name is Greg Mortimer, like Aaron already mentioned. So, I have the good fortune to serve as the Chief Information Technology Officer at Adams 12, or put in more plain English, I'm the head of the IT department, and happy to be with you all. I've got to confess a little bit. I'm jumping back and forth between our long range, our LR PAC meeting and then this meeting, and so I think I got here just in time. So anyway, we can go ahead and jump to this next slide, Aaron. So, right. So in the 2.5.4 asset protection portion here, what we are, the part in IT that is measured in this monitoring report is our uptime for our key systems. And so the goal, the stated goal in our monitoring report is that for our key systems, which you can see outlined there, that we'll have up for 99% of the time. And as you can see, we've reported out here what have been identified as the key systems for this monitoring report. That probably most of these are pretty self-explanatory why those have been identified. Our student information system, in other words, Infinite Campus, is pretty key, not just for being able to take attendance, but all kinds of important student information, from health information to contact information and so forth, is in that system. We obviously need to have that up a high percentage of the time. Our HR and finance systems, internet availability. It's interesting, just a few years ago, it looked very different in terms of how reliant instruction is on online resources, but that becomes more so every day. Our phone system, absolutely, from a student and staff safety perspective, if phones are not operational, that creates a lot of risk for students from a student safety perspective. And then also when we're talking about cloud email and office productivity apps, for the most part, this is what we call our Google Workspace. So for email, and then also calendaring, and probably most importantly for instruction, everything from Google Docs to slides to spreadsheets, et cetera. And then also when we're talking about our identity and access management system, depending on what your background may be with this group, that may or may not mean something to you, but really this is the ability to log into the system, to our network and all the systems that are accessed via that. If that is down, then we're kind of dead in the water. People can't log in and can't have teaching, learning, and a lot of our operational activities going on. And so the goal is to hit 99% uptime. It's interesting within the IT space. A lot of times people will there'll be discussion around the number of nines of uptime, ranging anywhere from 2 nines, in this case 99%, to the gold standard would be 99.999. And we've had some conversations internally. It's like, should we look at moving to the next level? Should it be 99.9 or beyond that? It is interesting to note that as you add another 9 of availability, the costs don't increase linearly. They increase maybe more geometrically as it kind of increasingly, it becomes an increasingly steep curve. So 99%, it's worth mentioning that this is as measured by school hours, is we're not talking about after hours, weekends, et cetera. And what that translates to is up to 13 hours of downtime throughout the year. Now, for our last fiscal year, I remember this day very clearly because of the disturbance it caused for the district. I think it was September 7th. We had the network went down for 6 hours and 37 minutes. And that was a very nerve-wracking time trying to get things up, and you realize the network goes down and you're impacting literally tens of thousands of people, from students to teachers to families, et cetera. And so even with that outage, 6 hours and 37 minutes, we did meet the goal of less than 13 hours of downtime throughout the year. So a couple things that are worth noting, like say, for instance, if we did want to look at somehow making investments to increase that uptime, a couple things that are worth noting for this current fiscal year, the numbers of which are not reflected here. We have had a couple of incidents that were caused by major vendors. One, Microsoft, and another one, CrowdStrike, when we used extensively their applications, and when they released some updates that were not sufficiently tested, that resulted in some pretty significant downtime for the district. And so less than 6 hours and 37 minutes, but it was certainly disruptive. So that's, if anything, it's a call out to an increasingly complex technology environment that's not just on our own network here, but also as we depend on services from really large and widely used vendors, right? So recognizing that there are some elements that are beyond our control, one of the things that we started to get serious about this year is developing plans for those times if we're going to have, when we have technology outages. Throughout the district, people can have a better understanding of what to look to for backup plans. Really, like what are tasks that can be done without some of our key systems. And so what we've done is, since July up until a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed 18 different groups throughout the district, including Aaron and his team and people in HR. Also, on the learning services side, we interviewed some executive directors. We also had the opportunity to speak directly with a number of principals at each level throughout the system. And we walked through there in that interview system to say, okay, if we assume, like, say, a 24 to 72-hour outage, if something were to happen, it could be a ransomware attack, it could be just a failure of our own equipment, it could be something caused inadvertently by another vendor. What are the systems that you're most dependent on? And then if we were to assume a 2 to 3 day outage, what are some items that what are some backup plans that we could have in place? And like, say, for instance, I know that Aaron and his team, they have some backup plans about how to get payroll done, some items like that. And so we finished those interviews about 2 weeks ago and collected a ton of data. We're in the midst right now of compiling that data, and we'll be going to cabinet before too much longer to make some to give an update, kind of an executive summary of what we learned, and then also making some recommendations about some backup plans that could be in place in the event of future outages. So I wanted to give that additional context there. And Aaron, I think we've got one more slide here. If we could move over to that one. And you know what? I think I've covered part of this slide already. I did mention the uptime is measured during the school day. This other part, just some insight into what we do when we do have outages. By the way, if we gave a similar update last year to FAC, and so if you were on that part of that conversation, I apologize for the redundancy. Well, one of the things that we do is whenever we do have an outage of a major system and other systems as well, we document that and we provide an executive summary for that. And then if it's a significant incident, we do come together as an IT leadership team to debrief that, to review it, and then to look at any lessons learned or process improvements that we can make as a result of what we learned from that outage. And I'll mention one of those process improvements that we've made is getting more serious and more methodical about doing this incident response interviews that I mentioned a few minutes ago. The other part is that we have, because of an outage that we had earlier this year with Microsoft, I think it's worth mentioning, they released just a normal security update, and then it inadvertently took down another system. The challenge was that it took us several days to get to the right level of Microsoft's support to be able to get some additional help in troubleshooting that and putting in place a fix. So one of the things that we've done as a result of that is we've been having interviews with a number of kind of technology partners who would have more clout with large vendors than we do, to put in place some sort of agreement where in the event of future outages like that we could quickly escalate to kind of like an advocate on our side to help us resolve some of these outages more quickly. So I think that about covers it, the key items on those slides, and along with some additional commentary. So I'd like to pause and see if there's any questions from the group.
This is Venus. I have some questions. Was there any outage of services which impacts the operation so serious that it should be a concern we should address sooner than later, or it's just normal outage?
So I'm not sure if I was able to hear everything you asked. Something along the lines of there are some outages that are so significant that
it becomes a concern we need to address, like it's because of staffing issue, it's because of the software need to be upgraded, or it's because of like capital improvements like devices.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. So that's a great question. When I look at the outages that we've had over the past couple of years, including this fiscal year, none of those were related to outdated equipment. And so, like if we take the outage that occurred in September of 2023, we have something called a storage area network. And then we also have another piece called a core network switch. And that may or may not mean much to you if you're not in the IT world, but those are two key fundamental pieces of our network for uptime. They're made by different manufacturers. And in that case, it turned out that our storage area network had we were applying an update that we just need to do routinely with technology updates. We tested that as thoroughly as we could, but it didn't play well with our core switches. And so it turned out that was a bug in our storage area network that had to be addressed. And so in those cases, that the equipment that we're using was current, and we're grateful that we have the funding to put all that in place. But again, it was just two complex systems not playing well together. So again, that kind of speaks to the complexity of the technology space. but wasn't related to, say, a lack of investment in those spaces. Did I address your question?
Yeah, equipment wise, it's good. Do you have any concern on staffing? Do you have enough staff?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. So I feel very fortunate that even in these times that K-12 financing is fairly challenging. It's well documented that K-12 is not sufficiently funded in Colorado. But in spite of that, we've had a lot of support from cabinet, from the superintendent, and from the board to increase some IT staffing in key areas. And so one of those areas for sure where I think that we've been especially fortunate is in our cybersecurity team. We actually have a team of 5 cybersecurity folks, and the district has been willing to make some significant investments in technology tools to better protect our networks. And I'm not aware of another K-12 district in Colorado that has that degree of staffing. So we're grateful for that. I would say that we have sufficient staffing on what we call our infrastructure services team. And that's the team that supports our data centers and our network and all the network gear. That team definitely carries a fairly heavy workload, but especially by K-12 standards, I feel like we're sufficiently staffed in that area. There's some other areas of IT that I think might be somewhat understaffed comparatively speaking, but in terms of critical infrastructure, I think we're sufficiently staffed in that area. And again, I feel very grateful for the support that we've had from district leadership to support those investments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, it mentions that the percentages are based on school hours or school day work hours. So is it safe to assume that maintenance windows and upgrades are done outside of those, and those percentages are agnostic of that?
That is a correct assumption. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
The other question that I had was, ultimately, I know the district has made significant expenditures, like with Chromebooks and such, and transitioning to cloud-based and more internet-type capabilities. Do you foresee, do you have like a regular refresh schedule for those types of things?
Hey, that's a great question. By the way, do you happen to be IT or IT adjacent? Those are. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm an IT. I've been in IT for 21 years.
Okay, great. So, yeah, we do have a refresh schedule that we are in the midst of refining. So, let's see. There's a couple different areas that are worth calling out. We have had some significant funding during from COVID funding, from ESSER funding, and then also some grants in the federal space that allowed us to ramp up pretty quickly for sufficient number of staff devices. And so, and those are mostly Chromebooks, although we do have, I'm sorry, I said staff. I meant to say student devices. And so we do have a sufficient number of Chromebooks right now, and we have identified some budget that for a replacement schedule of those. Although we are at this time, as we're moving into the budget season, we want to make sure that we have those numbers as refined as possible. And I was meeting with the folks who are the head of our device team yesterday just to see how we're doing in that space. And I think we're getting to a pretty good place there. The part that we have the bit of a question mark now is last year, almost exactly a year ago, we made a decision to centralize the funding and then also the management for staff devices, for laptops primarily, for folks in departments and schools. Up until last year, it had been up to departments to be able to, to identify funding in their own budgets for laptop replacements. And so we think that it makes a lot of sense to centralize both the budget for that and then also the administration of that. And so over this past year, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that we have a good understanding of the total number of laptops and other devices that are out in schools. Different principals and other department heads would make various decisions about how many devices are needed for a school, and then also say a variety of devices. Maybe choosing MacBooks or whatever sort of brand that they might want to have for Windows-based devices. And so as we consolidate and standardize on that, we'll be able to save budget over the long haul because of that space. But we're still in the process of wanting to identify of having a good long range plan for staff devices. And in fact, we have a meeting scheduled fairly soon with Aaron's team to look more closely at what our projections are over the next number of years. And that is a bit of a question mark as we head into our budget season in terms of how best to fund that. So that's a space that's becoming less and less blurry over time. So other follow-up question around that, Kelly, or does that address your question?
I hope that takes care of it, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate the info.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Aaron, they're going easy on me. Not too many tough ones here.
Yeah, save those up for next time.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. And on behalf of the committee, we appreciate that you're coming in and supporting the work of the committee so that they can support the board.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks
Greg.
so much. All right. Y'all have a good day.
You too.
Okay. So now I just quickly, in our last 8 minutes or so, I want to go over just the last piece of the board presentation from last night. So bear with me as I reopen presentation. Okay. And for the purpose of this part of the presentation, what I want to do is mostly concentrate on the general fund, but certainly we can just jump to the other pieces. We're going just a bit out of order here. I added quarterly financials, mostly because I needed filler and I wanted to fill some time. So when we look at the quarterly financials, they now increase the size of this. What I mentioned earlier is that, and I want to highlight, is you'll see right here on this line, this is our state equalization line. And of course, it's not going to highlight unless I'm slower. You'll see that traditionally in the prior year that we, at this point during the first quarter, we had been at 25% of our state share. And as I mentioned, because of the change of state law, that we're no longer receiving 1/12 every month, we're now receiving 1/9. And because of that, we're now at 33%. So we always want to point that out because we did get a question, wow, are we really so far ahead that we're going to receive that much more in state equalization? No, it was a change to state law. So that is a piece that we want to point out. Additionally, I want to point out the other piece that we talked about is because of this change in state law, then it's allowed us to invest in continuing to invest more of those funds, because instead of the state retaining their portion over 1/12 instead of 1/9, instead of them holding on to it and gaining interest on their side, we get to do it on our side. So, it's a very good piece for us. And you'll see here that already above budget, are almost above budget, 69% of budget, even just through the first quarter of the year. And there are two factors of that. One is because we have additional funds due to the state change, but also because interest rates remain higher than we would have expected them. When we put the budget together back in March timeframe, there was certainly quite a bit of discussion about how many times the Federal Reserve would have ratcheted down rates by now, and they have not done that. And we expect, as most economists now expect, that there will be a pause in December and January, and probably through February before the Federal Reserve again is in a position where they believe that they would adjust in any meaningful way. So we would continue to expect, with increased cash balances as well as increased over budget interest rates, that we would then expect those portions to continue. So that is really quite good. So I wanted to share those pieces with you on the quarterly financials. I would say that you'll see here we're just a bit above historical what we would be on expenditures, but that is really not a meaningful variance because purchase services can happen at any time, and the rest of it, other than salaries and benefits, can be quite fluid throughout the year. I will also say that under salaries and benefits, you'll see that that is directly related to where we were in the prior year. And why are we not at 25% of salaries and benefits if we're a quarter of the way through the year? It is because that teachers are not paid. Their contract ends in July, which is the first month of the new fiscal year. So their salary increases do not occur until the August payroll. And then we would recognize the FY 24-25 salaries, including teacher salaries, our licensed educator salaries, over the remaining part of the year. So we're very happy to present these to the board where we feel as if those pieces are quite okay. And then the rest of the slides are all of our other funds, which are quite fluid and all reserved properly. And they include our instructional reserve, and I mentioned that we've always had that as part of our assigned fund balance. As Greg mentioned, we also have funds set aside for, as Kelly mentioned, ensuring that we have money set aside for a calendar of a replacement schedule. So we keep track of those funds individually and ensure that we're reserving them. And as we've talked in other times about risk, we make sure that we are also tracking our risk and our risk assessment and where we are in paying those premiums. And then,
Hey, Aaron.
yes.
I'm sorry. I know I was late joining today, and if you guys have already covered this, we certainly can, move on past it. I'm just curious. Obviously, recently we had an election with a couple of things on the on the ballot for the district. The bond measure and the mill increase. I believe the bond measure passed and the mill increase did not. Have you guys assessed, what should we expect? Is there anything that the Finance and Audit Committee needs to be aware of? How will these financials, how are you guys expecting these financials to change as a result of either of those, one passing and one not?
Fine. So we'll address, I think, first the bonds. That is the easier piece, is that the $830 million of bonds did pass, as Mike said. And what will happen there is we'll begin issuing those bonds in January We'll issue approximately 180 million in the first tranche, and that we would expect to spend over the first 3 years of the bond period. We expect the bond period to last anywhere between 6 and 8 years. And so we have those items planned out. And we feel as if we have a really good handle on the timing of those of how we'll stagger those projects out, and that has been shared with LRPAC, and I'm happy to make sure that we get that presentation into our folders for FAC as well. On the flip side, as you mentioned, the $34.5 million mill levy override did not pass. I think there were very specific pieces within how we expected to spend those mill levy override funds, and that included the increase of CTE, expansion of CTE, and a couple of other issues. Those obviously will be put on hold until the board or until the voters are able to approve a mill levy override. The board did discuss last night as to whether begin planning and thinking about whether they would put something on the ballot in 2 years or 4 years, or what the right timing is for that. If you know about Douglas County, you'll know that they had put a bond issue on the ballot every year, quite literally every year until the thing passed, and it finally passed. I think their voters finally had enough of it being on the ballot, so they voted yes. I'm not sure. So as we go into the budget cycle, now we're starting the budget cycle for the 25-26 school year, and we'll be assessing how not having the mill will impact any of the future budgeting pieces. I think the biggest thing that we've seen, Mike, is that there won't be an expansion of programming. Our expectation is that we can continue the programming that we have. At the same time, there has been, and the superintendent has announced many times, that we did have some one-time funds and uses of one-time funds in this year's budget. And that has really been something that has occurred all through the COVID years, that there's been some expenditure of one-time money. What will need to happen, I think, in looking at what will happen with the School Finance Act and the number of kiddos that we have, I think we'll be looking at the impact of those one-time funds and whether or not we can continue some of those programs. But I believe the superintendent has indicated that there would not be a need to make any of those downward adjustments, I would say, in the upcoming year. The other thing I think that was mentioned last night, I think those were the biggest pieces, but I think as we wrap up this piece, what I'll go ahead and do is stop recording, and then we'll go ahead and continue working on the monitoring report.